Hey everybody, welcome back. This is part 3 of my equipment tour. And this time I'm going over my 3-digit tractors, 3-digit Olivers. First up is the 440. In 1958, Oliver basically just took the Super Series and took the super word off, added a 0 onto everything, and got their 3-digit series. The 440, not a lot was changed from the Super 44. It just was not a high-selling tractor, and so paint was updated. 1958 and the 3 digits is when you saw the Clover White first make its appearance on Oliver. This saw the end of the red wheels, green wheels. From here on out, tractors were, at least the ag tractors, were green and white. There was a minor exception here and there, but one of them would be the Super 44. For a short time, they did produce that as a Super 44 with the white wheels, because in 1958, some point during the year, well, it was already economically tough times for the farm industry, and Oliver had a strike at their South Bend plant, and so they ended up closing South Bend number 2 and moving the tractor production that was there to Charles City with all the other tractors. So this 440 was produced in Charles City and not South Bend. Dad bought this tractor off from Ollie Schaefer. And I guess I don't know any of the backstory on it from before that. I had a new tire for this side, and then that's the same size that the Deutz takes, and it had a flat. I mow lawn with a Deutz, so now I got to get another tire for the 440. But same setup as the Super 44, Clark engine, Clark transmission, Continental engine, flathead 4-cylinder. And this one actually has the serial number tag intact on the little U-joint shield. Good little runner. I just had it running a couple weeks ago. And this one actually has, unlike my Super 44, has the hydraulic unit with 3-point hitch on the back. And that is not a, well, it is an independent hydraulic unit because the pump's driven off the engine. PTO is not independent on these. It's driven off the same shaft as the transmission. And this has the cultivator lift bracket. The step was not original. This is actually a 55 series step. But these little tractors can be a bit of a bear to get on and off from, so Dad added those steps on, and it definitely makes it a lot easier. A lot of people climb up over the back, step on the PTO shield, and end up ruining that. Then we have the 550. That replaced the Super 55. Displacement was increased. And horsepower was, of course, increased with that. The white paint scheme. The early 550s. And this varied early on. This was red letters, then black. Early on had the, let's go down to the 880 real quick here. 550s had this style of grill. And there was actually a sales note that they sent to the dealers, and when they came out with this style shell there, and I think 63 or 64, I know the 770 was in 64. This was probably 64 as well. You could get, for not much money, the fiberglass grill and replace the old steel one to update the look of a 550. And I'd have to double check the serial number break on that, but I think this might have had that done to it. But there was a lot of variations on the 550. They made it in some way or another up until 1974, I believe it was. Mostly in industrial versions in the later years. Just a real handy tractor. Independent PTO, independent hydraulics. Well, I guess technically live, independent, but this was a tractor on our farm. I remember when I was a kid, it had a loader on it, hydraulic bucket, and this is what Dad cleaned the manure out of the cattle barns with before we got a skid steer. And had a concrete barrel, or a 55-gallon drum full of concrete with 3-point hitch attachments on it. He put that on the 3-point hitch to counterbalance it for loader work. And then eventually, once we got a skid steer, we just didn't use the loader on him anymore. Took the loader off, and that's the loader we ended up trading for the Super 55 that we have. I got to where I mowed a lot of lawn with it, and then for a while there, when gas got over $4 a gallon, that's when I started mowing with the little Deutz we have, and it's really good on diesel fuel, and I need to get the 550 out and probably just put it on the mower or something but I had that running a couple weeks ago. So obviously still a runner. I don't keep batteries in every tractor because that just gets expensive. It's a lot easier to grab a battery and slide it on in than for what batteries cost anymore. It's got the torsion seat and it's set for my size, so it's tight. There were several variations on the decals, just depending on the year of the 550. This is Alan's 550. It lives here at Losey's Home for Wayward Olivers. It's been restored. He bought it this way. My brother's been using it to dig some post holes. Just a handy tractor. But once again, our philosophy is the best way to keep them running is to run them. A rare option. Most of them didn't have it equipped. This was an external hydraulic remote valve. If it didn't have it, there was a cover on here to route the oil properly. That is the factory. It was made by Vickers, but it was the Oliver factory valve to go on there. Then we have the 660, which was the replacement for the Super 66. Essentially the same engine as the 550 here, 4-cylinder. And they did not ever change the sheet metal on the 660. We messed up when we restored it. This plate should have been white with red letters like the 440 is over here. One of these days I ought to just get around and repaint it. But they were not selling a lot of these. There was contemplation of discontinuing the 660 model. And they decided to go. There was enough dealers wanting to place orders, so all they did was just change the paint because they just felt it wasn't worth the effort or the cost of restyling the sheet metal to match the rest of the series for no more than they were going to sell. That would drive the price up, and then you sell fewer of them, and then you wonder why you did it. There were about 1,400, and I think the number 1440 Total 660s built. There was a lot of them built as power units for road rollers. So the actual ag number is much lower. They're pretty rare tractors, especially if you can find them in diesel. This one's gas. Diesel wide front. This is definitely a high dollar tractor. Had this one running a couple weeks ago as well. It needs a bath. They all need a bath. I moved them here from a more dusty barn last year, and I did hose them down, but they just need a good hand washing. Dad found this one, I think up near St. John's, Michigan, and just parked alongside the road for sale. Bought it, and it was a pretty easy restoration mechanically. Seemed to be pretty sound. A few cobbled up things on it that had to be uncobbled. We never did anything more than a tune-up to the engine, and it's a strong horse. It'll outrun my Super 77 on the auger. So I don't know what's necessarily in the engine, whether it's got some higher compression pistons or what in it, but it's a good runner. A tachometer was regular equipment for all 3-digit tractors except for the 440. You could get a hydraulic unit. You could still get the power lift, PTO on the back. I'll get to some of these implements that are hiding behind the tractors in a future video. Next up is the 770, and that was a long-lived tractor, and this is the later style. This one is a 64, first year for this style of grill. Unlike they did start out with a grill just like the 880 here, this style. And decals instead of the nameplate, this placard, name spear, whatever you want to call it. Came with the Cockshut line of tractors that White bought in 1962. Cockshut was using that, and apparently they liked it. I like it. And so that's when the name spear, or where the name spear came from. They made the 770 up until 1967. Late ones even had a factory alternator. You could get full hydrostatic steering instead of either manual steering or power assisted steering, the Gemmer steering, hydraulics, the whole 9 yards. This one I buffed and waxed a couple years ago. A friend drove it in the 4th of July parade, which just happens to be today, the 4th of July. Unfortunately, no parade. But I was impressed with how well this one cleaned up with a little buffing and waxing. And the story behind this one, a customer brought it in. He was having an auction, hadn't done anything. They'd been sitting out for a few years, couldn't get it started, and brought it to us to get started. Cleaned up for his auction. And Dad made the guy an offer on it as it sat. And he went for it, took it, whatever you want to call it. And so we had mechanics start tearing it down, and the engine in that thing was just all crusted up and gunked up from just sitting outdoors, corrosion and stuff. And he stripped it down and just cleaned everything up, put it back together, and boy, it purrs like a kitten now. You would never know it was that nasty inside. And just from sitting out in the weather, how bad the inside of that engine got, and what was clearly a good running tractor, and still is now, fortunately. One of the things that came out with the 3-digit tractors, this only on the 770 and 880, was something called the power traction hitch. And unfortunately, I do not have either one of mine with a power traction hitch. But it was essentially kind of it could be used as a 3-point hitch. You could use it as a drawbar, and the idea was you could lift up on it to transfer more weight to the tractor in tougher conditions, get a little more traction to your to your tractor. And then you could also have a top link and switch out ends and hook up to different stuff and run 3-point hitch implements, but it wasn't a true 3-point hitch in the sense that it didn't have draft control and set position sensing. You had to run the hydraulic lever up and down to raise and lower the height and maintain it where you wanted it. So power traction hitch was gave Oliver a 3-point hitch on some of their what was at that time larger tractors, and wasn't just kind of a way of trying to play catch up with the market until they could develop something new. In the comments about the 3 brake pedals or on an Oliver, I figure I just throw this in here. Pretty straightforward. The left one does your left brake, the right does your right brake. If you push on the middle, it pushes both up and equalizes them. And then there's a latch to hold the brake pedals. They can get worn and not hold good. But that's the idea of the middle one. It's just an equalizer pedal, so you can apply both brakes with one foot. Next up is the 880, and this one's for you, Oliver 880. We've been asking when this one's going to be on. I do not use this one at the time because well, the manifolds are just, the intake manifold is really shot. So is the exhaust where it meets the head, and just can't get a good gasket seal. Doesn't run very good that way. And so it's just kind of sad as a, something I just need to buy new manifolds for it, which you can get those, so that ain't a big problem. But unfortunately, I've robbed a couple parts off from it. The starter's not on it at the moment. The muffler went on another tractor. But I do check it. The engine's still free. This one originally came from, can barely, I think that one still says Ted's, but Ted's Service in Saline, Michigan, which is near Ann Arbor, Michigan. Don't call that number. They've been closed for quite a while. One of the things the 880 had, or the both the 880 and the 770 could have, is the power booster drive. Ooh. Oh man, stiff. Hasn't gotten used much. But it's essentially a shift on the go. It utilized a dry Rockford style over center clutch in here, and then a sprag clutch and a gearbox going into the transmission. So it worked a lot like a hydropower drive. You had direct drive with a clutch pack, and that was essentially your regular gears, but then you could pull back to a low range. That was a overrunning gear, so you had to watch out going down hills, just like a hydropower. But that would give you a second speed on the go without having to clutch in each gear. So essentially doubled the 6 forward gears to 12 forward gears. There was a lot of problems with those. Part of it was just a misapplication of the Rockford clutch. That thing was, if you're in low, it was spinning around in there rattling, and caused a lot of wear. If you were in high, it held better, but then the sprag clutch, well, they had some trouble with castings not getting cleaned out good enough and wearing them out. They depended on lubrication from the rear end, and so if guys didn't have the right oils and additives, that was hard on them. So just there was several updates. There was a campaign where they would round up a bunch of tractors at a dealer, and Oliver actually sent mechanics out, factory trained guys, to update all these power boosters. A lot of guys have replaced them and with just a straight shaft, and essentially gotten rid of them. So there are not too many around these days. And then another unique thing this 880 has, they went to a helical gear transmission, which took away that characteristic Oliver transmission whine. And they had some troubles with that due to just not good enough lubrication. And so then they offered a external pump or external lubrication kit, and there was a little bit of tear down on that to get all that in, and gave you a filter and a pump. And so this one's had that update with the external filter kit and pump kit, but they just really wasn't a helical transmission. Since the gears are teeth are cut at an angle, they cause thrust because they're wanting to slide away from each other. That gets down on the noise and gets more power transmission through because the teeth are longer, but it also, that thrust pushes on the housing, and they had some distortion in there, and it just, housing wasn't built heavy enough for a helical gear set. And so they learned that kind of the hard way, trying to update it. And you see, so this one should, your serial tags are still up here on the dash. Probably too dark in here. Yes, this one is a 48. It's kind of like I was telling about on the Super Series. On your specification number, the first two digits tell you what model it is and what your version. So like this is, the Supers had 18 and 28 for, and the 28s were the improved Supers. When they came out with the 3 digits, 880s got 38, and then when they improved the transmission, updated that, they went to 48, like this one has for a spec number. The 770 is a 47. So the second digit 7 tells you it's a 7 series tractor, or 770 or Super 77, and the 4 tells you it's not the first generation. Oh, this 660 is early enough. It should be a 36, if I remember right. Yes, it's a 36. And my 550. That one's a 45 because it's not the first round. And 34 on the 440. The 880 was discontinued in 1962-ish. I really need to look these things up. Anyways, it was replaced by the 1600, which I'll have some of them come up in the next video. And whereas the 770 didn't have a direct replacement, and it was a popular model, so they kept making it. One of the things I wanted to mention was, for a short time, and I'm talking like a couple weeks, they decided to paint the 880 a different color than the rest of the tractors. It's become known as the Miss Green 880. And it was also around the time of another strike. They started building these tractors, and then there was a strike, and only 200 and less than 250, I believe it was, but I'm not going to put an exact number on it because I don't remember, but the number is out there. And then by the time they got back from the strike, dealers had sent out all sorts of complaints because the ones that had gotten their Miss Green 880s, it was a lighter shade. They're like it's sick. They don't like it. The customers don't like it. It's terrible. The idea is a lighter color tends to make something look bigger. And when you look at a 770 and an 880, physically, they're just like, to look at them, you'd think they're the same tractor, size-wise. 770 had smaller displacement, just a smaller engine than the 880, a lighter transmission, but it had, pretty much all the same options. But they were physically different tractors. when it comes to engine and transmission parts. So just to try to make that bigger 880 look bigger, they thought they'd just put a lighter shade of green on it, that mist green, and it was a total flop. And just because of timing with this plant strike in Charles City, that didn't get many made before the dealers had a chance to complain about it. And Oliver sent out a letter almost basically saying, oh no, that didn't happen. But they said it would be just, or all 880s would be meadow green. And there is a serial number range on that. And so a lot of them got repainted to green. And if you have an 880 and its paint's peeling off and it's this really light, limey pea soup green, it might have been a mist green, because dealers would repaint them because the customers didn't like them. Customers would repaint them because they didn't like them. It's hard to find an original one just because so many people repainted them. But definitely a unique tidbit of Oliver history, the things they would try to do to sell a tractor. Next up, the 990, the largest of the Oliver line in 1958. Powered by a 371 GM two-stroke diesel. This one came out of the Dakotas. I was going to look up where it came from and I forgot to. But it's a good runner. Nice original paint. Likes to mark its territory like all Detroit diesels do. This one's early enough. It has the red letters up here instead of the black. Notice the 80 has black letters. And then later on with the 770s, they kind of started getting cheaper and just put a steel plate with a decal on there. Of course, the 660, since they didn't change the sheet metal, still has the Oliver shield. They did have an orange one of this. They're pretty rare if you can find an original one. But Dad bought this as a package deal with the Super 99. It was in the last video. This one is a South Bend tractor. So as mentioned earlier, they had a strike that ended up closing the South Bend No. 2 factory where this and the 440 were, or the Super 44 were made. No 440s were made in South Bend. They were contemplating discontinuing that model, but this one, because of that, only has a serial number. Being a South Bend tractor, it doesn't have a specification number. Only about the first part of 58 that they made them in South Bend. After that, it was Charles City. This was similar to the Super 99, that it had some repainting done on it, and I was able to get some of that off. This filter was all covered up with paint, been repainted, and I was able to blast that outer layer of paint off and bring back the original decals. Got some video of this last year running auger. Put a link up there for the 990. Been making playlists of the individual tractors. There was also a 995, and the difference there was they ran an Allison torque converter, and then it still had the 6-speed forward and 2 reverse transmission. And so all 995s had the torque converter in them. They also ran a little bit higher RPM, another 200 RPM on the engine, because the torque converter ate up some of the horsepower. And so in order to keep the 995 at the same rating as the 990, they ran the engine a little faster. Those are a pretty rare tractor. I do not have one of those. I mean, the 990 is hard enough to find a good one, but 995 is really tough. There was also a 950, and that had either the Waukesha engine, a 6-cylinder engine. You could get it in either gas or diesel. I do not have a 950. Essentially, all the models that were the Super 99 before, because you could get the Super 99 with the 371 Detroit or the 6-cylinder gas or the 6-cylinder diesel. Couldn't get it with the torque converter. They split those out into a couple different models. And it makes sense because the horsepower rating on a 990 was so much, quite a fair amount higher than a 950. And their 950s are fairly hard to come by because most people wanting this big of a tractor wanted power, and so they were going to spend a little bit extra and get that Detroit engine. This is the operator station for the 990. This is a 2-stick transmission. You could get them either way. The traditional 1-stick, like Oliver had, where you just gated through the neutral to between the two ranges, and they offered this. Some guys just liked the ranged lever, and so they offered it both ways, and the 2-stick is apparently the less common, so guys like that just because it's something else everybody else doesn't have. I don't know, personally I like the single stick, but not the end of the world. Brake pedals, there should be a tube connecting these brake pedals, and then there was a latch mechanism to lock in the parking brake. And it seems like so many of these Super 99 990s, they just I don't know, guys didn't like that brake lock or what, but they all are missing it. And so that does make this annoying as far as parking it somewhere. Usually I shut it off in gear, and like if I'm going to put on the auger and I have to go chock the wheel and then get back on and put it back in neutral and start it back up because I can't lock the brakes. So I'm looking for that. Hydraulic unit. Early, like the Super 99, they just ran a hydraulic pump off the engine. And this 990 has the hydroelectric unit. It still has the pump driven off the engine, but has the hydroelectric unit, so you could use hydroelectric cylinders with it if you wanted. This little doohickey here is the ether dispenser to get it started. There's like a cartridge you put in there. And then this thing would stab the cartridge, let the ether out, it'd shoot in the engine. This is a little pack of ether. Boom. Hit the key and start her up. I've got a reproduction gauge to replace the temperature gauge. This one does work fine, but it's not the right one. The oil pressure gauge used to be a John Deere one, and I got a good reproduction in there to fix that. Showing 7,356 hours. But that's the 3-digit tour. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Next up, it will be the 4 digits, the 100 series. Hope you enjoyed the video and have a great day.